Hi, welcome to Breaking Silence, the podcast. My name is Chiara,
And I'm Christina.
and we will be your hosts for today's episode. Christina, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about this format?
Well, we are a team of 8 students at the University of Graz, interested in furthering the conversation about racism, different forms of discrimination and privilege, as well as what it means to do anti racist and social justice work in Austria and beyond. We started talks about these important social topics in the scope of a university course, which was taught at the Department of American Studies. And we are now trying to engage in the discussion in more depth to share what we have learned and are still learning with the public.
These are not meant to be easy discussions, but they are necessary if we, as a group of white students, want to educate ourselves and the world, and if we want to advocate for racial justice. We understand that there is still a lot of learning to do, as well as unlearning some of the things we've been socialized with in the society, where racism exists on different levels. It's a long process that requires openness to learning and commitment. With our project, we choose to speak up when others are often silent, to do our share as true allies to those who have been experiencing racism and discrimination.
In this attempt to raise awareness for such sensitive topics, we decided to continue a university based public outreach project called Breaking Silence Graz, which was originally founded by students in the spring of 2021. And two of the founding members are here with us today. Antonia and Laís, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome. It's lovely to have
Thank
you here.
you.
Thank you very much.
It's really nice to be here and nice to see this project coming to life.
Thank you.
Amazing. We are going to talk about that now in more detail. So, actually, for the first question, Antonia, some of our listeners might be aware of the project and might have even engaged with it on social media. But please give us all a refresher and tell us what exactly is Breaking Silence.
Yeah, I'm really happy to tell you about that. So, in general, we had a class in university in which we learned a lot about the topic of racism in general. We talked about it so much and did a lot of self reflection. And we realized that many people are lacking knowledge about this topic and they feel a little bit uncomfortable to talk about the topic of racism.
Mm-hmm.
So if we felt like breaking the silence is so important, like breaking the silence and talking about this. And we need to talk about the topic of racism when we want to create a more just world. So that's the reason why we created a 14 days anti-racism challenge with the title Breaking Silence. So the same title that you still have, what is really nice. And this challenge happened, as you said, in spring this year. And it was a challenge that took place on Instagram and on a blog. And it was basically that we asked people in the audience to complete like a 55 to 10 or even longer task every day for 14 days. So 14 days of really engaging with this topic, what we felt was really relevant to make people aware and think about it. So we had many different topics, every day a different topic, identity and privileges, allyship, many different things. And we really saw, like, we wanted to have a learning curve that people we started with easier topics and went to more complex ones. And we saw engagement there. And for us, it was a really, cool project to see, to raise this awareness. Yeah.
That's great that you talked about this at length now. It's actually funny because the second question also concerns the social media challenge. So
Yeah,
Chiara was
I would
going
like
to
to, yeah,
talk about
sorry.
that. Yeah.
I'd like to address this question or direct this question towards Laís. While anti-racist work should not merely be a social media challenge, your 14-day challenge, as mentioned before, offered a chance to self-reflect and start critically thinking about those topics or topics people may not have thought about before in depth. While Antonia already mentioned some of the motivations behind this, I'd like to ask you, how exactly did you choose the topics? Did you follow the course themes? Did you just talk with each other? How was the thought process of that coming together?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say that I completely agree with you that anti-racist activism should not be made only through online or through social media platforms. That's something that was very clear to all of us doing the project from the beginning. But in April 2021, we found ourselves all in a hard lockdown and having this opportunity to do outreach projects and wanting to do something that could touch many people. And we saw that our way of doing this was to take it to the digital world. And our approach would be one that was very much educational, coming to a point of really targeting people that are well meaning, that really want to that are interested in the topic and that want to act anti-racist but don't know where to start, and that get shy about making mistakes or something. So that's a lot where we came from. And the topics, they were a mixture of topics that we were touched upon during our class with Dr. Adams, but also other topics that we thought were relevant to to the target audience that we were addressing, through an Austrian audience, and through the things that were happening at that point in time. So that's why we ended up with such a diverse type of topics. And as Antonia said, we wanted it to have a learning curve. So we started with easier reflections on topics related to racism, like related first to identity, and then we moved on to harder topics and also harder tasks, because this is the thing. At every day we had a topic that we shared some knowledge that we had learned, but we also had a task. We also had a challenge every day. And in the beginning, they were simpler. Reflect on this. Have you ever thought about this? And at the end, and as the challenge progressed, it became more demanding. Start a conversation with somebody about this thing, or sign this petition or something like that. So we really wanted with this challenge to move people from just a passive stance towards anti-racism work to an actually active position.
Thank you
Really
very much for the
interesting.
insightful details about this.
Now we've already touched upon the anti-racism challenge. To the both of you, I'd love to know which of the posts was the most significant to you and why.
That's a funny one because Laís and we talked about this actually
Oh,
quite some time
really?
ago, and
Okay.
we had the same one.
That's good.
Oh.
Yes, because to start with, we had a really long period of planning this whole anti-racism challenge. So we developed
Understandably
all
so.
those, quite some weeks and months, where we really developed the topic super well and all the posts and everything. And then one day in the middle of this challenge, there was the shooting of Asian Americans in Atlanta in the US. I don't know whether you remember
Yeah.
that. Was it?
Yeah.
And for us, that was a really shocking thing. And we had an emergency meeting, I would call it, with a group in the morning. And we said we can't just go on with our normal rhythm of posting everyday topic and not talk about this, what's happening there.
And I
So
remember, if I'm not
yeah.
mistaken, that day we were supposed to post something about media representation, or something that was really, to me at least, waking up that morning, it really felt like this is a second topic, like there's something
Yeah.
much more urgent that we need
Yeah.
to raise awareness to, and that we needed to learn as well. So I think that, at least for me, that was really interesting. Sorry for interrupting you, Tony.
No, sure. And then so that what we did was kind of developing a post within one day, and that was on anti-Asian racism, and that was something like we never talked about before, and it was like so eye-opening, and we learned so much within this one day, and it was so insightful. And I personally, I realized that there's so many dimensions of racism and discriminations that sometimes you have to be shaken and waken up that this is another thing that is so real. And I sometimes, it's rude to say, forgot to see.
Oh, definitely.
And for me, it was also added an extra layer of insightfulness because we were talking this whole time about anti-racism towards people of color in general. And I, as a woman of color, as an Afro-Latina, I was pretty much in the position of explaining to white folks what are the things. And when it came to the topic of anti-Asian racism and discrimination, it was also a challenge day that it was a lot for me to learn as well, how to be a better ally to communities and to people that experience a different type of discrimination from the one that I face.
Thank you.
That was, I think, your favorite post from the challenge, Chiara, if I'm not mistaken. Day 12,
The
how
day
to
12,
be an
yes,
ally.
exactly. That's my favorite post. Although all of the posts were really great, my personal favorite was how to be an ally, because we had I think there were two scenarios you had given us, and we had to reflect on how would we react in this situation, what would we do, how would we try to be an ally. And I really liked thinking about this further, because I had never been in such situations before, or at least I wasn't actively aware, obviously. And it was really great to think about it for myself. How would I try to be an ally? Yeah, but Christina, I'm throwing the ball right to you. What is your favorite challenge or post?
The post that I found most significant was day 3, which dealt with privileges of being white. And we talked about this in the course as well. And it was just such an eye opener for me, because I've never really been aware of that, because my whole life it was just normal for me to walk into any drugstore and find a foundation shade that matches my skin tone, or to have any hairdresser be willing or able to do my hair and never get told, we don't do that here. You must find somebody else. Also, when I turn on the TV, my race is represented in the media widely. So that was just a really like a reality check to just see, okay, you definitely have privileges that you've never been aware of.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and that's like also a reason why we put those challenges in the beginning, because I think when you want to talk and like engage in talks of racism, you first have to see your own standpoint in this. You have to see who you are in this, and kind of acknowledge that, and then move on with that.
Yeah, it's important to reflect on. Here we're talking about white privilege, and I think it's important for us to extend this to privilege as a whole. Like the privilege that you may not have white privilege, is I don't, for example, but you may have privilege because you are because of your class, or because of the country you were born in, or because of your gender. So there are many ways that privilege can play out, and I think it's this reflection on your identity and on your privileges is important for all of us to do.
Definitely, I can only agree.
Yeah.
Which brings me a little bit to the next question. Laís, as a woman of color, how would you encourage people or white people who might feel uncomfortable talking about those topics to engage in anti-racist work?
I would just say that uh, please do. You have to start somewhere. So of course you were not born knowing everything, knowing the appropriate terms. But then again, nobody is born knowing everything.
Hmm.
So starting is essential, and starting the starting points from that I would say is by informing yourself, but also by talking to your friends that or people you know, or colleagues that are of color, if they wish to talk about these topics as
Of
well,
course.
and listen to what they say, and uh, for the love of God, believe them when they say that something has
Yeah.
happened, or that
Yeah.
something has
Yeah.
made them feel uncomfortable, and try to be there to do to act in the way that they would like you to act, either by correcting yourself if you said or did something that was not appropriate, or by being a good ally. I don't know, sometimes it comes to arguing when we hear something and we just don't have the strength to reply, or it can be in so many different ways. I think that communicating and talking to the person, to the people in your life, is essential. And if you don't have people of color in your life, I think you should try to surround yourself with references and media representations, and listen to activists or even social media influencers of color. And in that way, you can try to broaden a little bit your view of the world, and on the way that the structures of racism play out in the life of individuals.
I think
Definitely.
what's also important to mention at this point is that I feel like a lot of people are just worried or concerned that that they can't do a lot, or that they can't do enough, right, for the cause.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it's already a good share if you start educating yourself, and slowly, as you said, the people around you, or listening to the right voices, giving them the chance to voice their concerns, because already a little bit can do a lot. If everybody would do, for example, a little bit in their life to change, it would definitely impact the world greatly. And I would like to throw in a term here, which is white guilt. For our listeners who might not be familiar with the term, white guilt describes the guilt brought upon by the recognition of unearned and unfair racial privileges, in this case for white people. On one hand, this guilt can lead people to unlearn racist attitudes and fight against white supremacy. On the other hand, a person may disengage from the feelings of guilt and shame and even become defensive. And that's why it's so important to overcome this feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And that really closely ties in with the term white fragility, which I'd also like to explain a bit for our listeners at home. Robin DiAngelo actually wrote an entire book on this phenomenon. She defines it as the lack of racial stamina, which consequently triggers defensive responses. Just like Laís already said before, you start arguing, you may experience feelings of fear, anger, or guilt, but also behaviors such as silence or even leaving the stress inducing situation. And this lack of racial stamina stems from socialization, namely individualism and objectivity, which are two Western ideologies that hinder white people from exploring the collective aspects of the white experience. So, that was just a little refresher for the people at home. But now we're moving on to our next question. After having completed the challenge and the course with Dr. Adams, to the both of you, what changed in your everyday life?
Yeah, I think I'm in general more sensitive with the use of wording, especially in German language. But also, for me, it's more easy to talk about this topic. Yeah, also all the conversations that we had within this whole project, it was so helpful. And now I'm also more eager to talk about this topic to people like my parents and my grandparents who are normally not in touch with this topic. And I feel like I'm motivated to bring this topic out there.
How has that worked out?
A lot. Like I just remember us hiking somewhere in Austria and talking about anti-racism. I mean, this is already a thing
Amazing.
with
Cool.
a group of 20 white people, and we were discussing about different things. And I think this is already super, super good.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
From my end, I can say that I was not an expert before, and I still don't consider myself an expert on the topic. But I think that doing the challenge, though it was very much consuming, emotionally consuming as well, not and also time consuming. I imagine that the podcast project that you guys are doing now is also the same way.
A
But
little.
I think that thinking so much about the wording and about the concepts and about all of these things made me a little bit more armed for facing things in the real world, and especially for being a better friend to my friends who are BIPOC. BIPOC it's an acronym that means Black, Indigenous, People of Color. A lot of my friends are BIPOC and have been facing things like housing discrimination or anti-Asian racism, like people yelling things related to Corona to them. And this has happened and will happen. And I think that for sure, all of this being more articulate in dealing with these topics has come from doing this project and reflecting on these terms for so intensively.
I think Christine and I can both agree with you both in this
Mm-hmm.
matter. We are more aware now. We are also, I guess, more open for the conversations. And as Antonia mentioned before, with the German language, we try to be more careful in how we express ourselves, which I think is very important. But yeah, Antonia, I would like to pose another question at you. What would you say are ways for people to continue in their anti-racist work and their education after having completed your challenge?
I think it's very important to, educate yourself about, I mean, there will always be like different dimensions of the whole topic. So I think it's like learning never stops. And also in the end of our project, we posted we had many posts on movies and books and whatever. There's so much out there to read and to inform yourself. And I think that's one thing. And as Laís also said, engage in people, with people of color, listen to them and not speak for them, but kind of amplify their voices. And so I think this lifelong commitment and learning is the one thing that you really have to tell yourself. It's not just completing one 14 days thing. So this 14 days challenge should be just like kind of the trigger
Kickstarter.
or the
Yeah.
like starting point.
The starting
And the
point, yeah.
same thing is when you listen to this podcast. It just should motivate you to do more. Don't stop.
Don't stop.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I completely agree with everything that Antonia said. It's a lifelong commitment. People of color don't have a choice on whether they engage or not with racism. So if you want to be an ally, you have to be in it for the long run. It's joining the Black Lives Matter march or posting something is already a good beginning, but the real work is in educating yourself and in taking action. So I completely agree with that. And I would also encourage people to not be afraid of making mistakes, and be aware that you will make mistakes.
Yeah, they will happen.
And that the actual the important thing and the true valuable thing is to correct yourself, to listen, to correct yourself, and to work on not repeating the mistakes again. And that's where that you show how good of an ally you really are, because making mistakes we all have done and we all will do.
Definitely. Well, we are already coming to an end. So we touched upon many important matters, very interesting issues, and you kind of already answered this question in a way. However, for our last question, we would like to know from the both of you, what does true allyship mean to you? And maybe you can sum it up very briefly.
For me, it's also really much related to the topic not being non-racist, but being anti-racist. I think those are really closely together, that you really actively do something against racism. And also allyship it's a supportive action. I feel like it's, as I said, amplifying voices and not um, speaking for other people, like me as a white people telling how um, my people of color friends are, for example. No, engaging with them and making a more inclusive society. And I think that should be the goal of the allyship.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Antonia summed it up very well. What I would say is that being a good ally is being willing to educate yourself, to walk by the side of minorities, of marginalized communities, and not trying to take the lead. That's not what an ally does. And yeah, and being active in your work, and never stopping to learn. And I would also encourage people, after maybe completing our Instagram challenge or finishing this series of podcasts, to extend their this allyship to other minorities and to other marginalized groups, not only people of color but also people with disabilities, or any other types of discriminations that happen in our society, and try to become a better ally to other people.
Oh,
Thank
you so
you
much.
for these two really important final statements. And with that, I would also like to thank you for joining us today and for sharing your experience or your experiences with us. They were really insightful, and it was definitely a pleasure having you both, Antonia and Laís. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It
Thank
was
you
a
for
pleasure to
having
be
me.
here. And it's such an important topic. And I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to all those episodes that will come.
We
Yeah.
hope so.
thank you for having us. It was really a pleasure, and much success.
Thank
Oh,
you.
thank you so much. So, for our listeners at home, do not forget to be on the lookout for the next episodes where we will continue our conversation with people who have been doing anti racist work and activism to show you different perspectives. We hope that with the help of our podcast, we can motivate you to lead such conversations with your family and friends and learn to address injustice when you see it.
That's it for now. Remember that together we can break the silence.